Thank you so much for joining us today as we discuss a transdisciplinary approach to disrupting sex trafficking networks. I'm Casey Lee Moss from Northeastern University, and I'm joined by my colleagues Lauren Martin and Tarek Samad from the University of Minnesota, Thomas Sharkey from Clemson University, and Kelly Barrick from RTI International, who will also be helping present today. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our support from the National Institute of Justice, as well as funding we've received under 2 awards from the National Science Foundation. Under these awards, we have developed a community-engaged transdisciplinary team to study how to more effectively disrupt sex trafficking networks. In today's presentation, my colleague Tarek will begin by describing what a community-engaged transdisciplinary team is and how it is different from other types of teams. Then Kelly will discuss our data collection methods, and Tom will give some examples about how we are using the data to develop mathematical decision models to gain new insights about the dynamics and effectiveness of disruption mechanisms. While doing this research, we also conducted a meta-study of our team to understand what practices helped foster effective team building within our community-engaged transdisciplinary team. And Lauren will share our findings from the meta-study. Finally, I'll come back to conclude and discuss some avenues for future work.
Thank you, Casey. So to begin with, I'm going to be discussing some broader aspects of our work, and in particular, addressing its transdisciplinary nature. Let me start by referring to some work by Latrecchiano and Misra on transdisciplinarity. They trace the first use of the term to the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget, and then offer the definition quoted here. Transdisciplinarity is knowledge production through integration as well as collaboration in the pursuit of complex societal problems. The team-based nature of transdisciplinary work is a central element, and the diversity of the team is important too. In addition to academic researchers, non-academic stakeholders, and in particular community members must be engaged. This is not easy, and complications are to be expected. Even simple words can be misconstrued across the team. The word code presents one example. For a technologist, this might mean software. For a criminologist, it might refer to legislation. In our data collection work, we used a code book to abstract key information. For a communications specialist, code might even have a meta-meaning. How is the message being presented to me being coded, for example? Building trust and cohesion across disciplinary boundaries and stakeholder groups requires a thoughtful approach to understanding each other. On this next slide, we distinguish among various kinds of collaborative work. After the simple one-discipline team, we next have teams where multiple disciplines are involved, but each within its own silo. This is what we mean by multidisciplinary. Interdisciplinary teams demonstrate knowledge integration and sharing. However, they still rely on the methodologies of their own field. The next step in the ladder is convergence, where we now start to engage communities beyond researchers. This is a pretty big leap out of the ivory tower, and will involve adopting new frameworks so that the societal problems being addressed are now recognized as more than a topic for intellectual abstraction. We then come to transdisciplinary, and as you can see, we've added another stage where community knowledge and academic knowledge are equally valued. This will only happen through engaging affected communities directly. So given that emphasis on breadth and representation of transdisciplinary teams, let me take a couple of slides to go over the team for our project. I'll first introduce the authors of this presentation. Lauren Martin is at the University of Minnesota. She's an anthropologist by training. Kelly Barrick is with RTI International and specializes in criminology. Tom Sharkey is in operations research at Clemson. Our lead author, Casey Lee Moss, is also in operations research and is at Northeastern University. Last and least, I am Tarek Samad, also at the University of Minnesota, and my background is in dynamical systems and control engineering. We have also benefited from the support of several research associates and students, Dan Cosmas at RPI, and Christina Melander, Emily Singerhouse, and Mahima Gupta at the University of Minnesota. Crucial to our work have been our advisory committee and partners. These are the Human Trafficking Task Force of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and 3 survivor advisory groups, Breaking Free, Pride, and the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center. It's hard to overemphasize the importance of our partners. They have kept us grounded in the realities of sex trafficking as a problem that affects individuals and communities. They have served as a check on oversimplifying assumptions that we, as researchers, might otherwise be tempted to make. And they have served as sources of expertise and knowledge from the perspectives of their own backgrounds and communities. We have also benefited from a number of other collaborators who are listed on this slide. These include researchers and students from quantitative operations research backgrounds, as well as qualitative researchers. Several universities are also represented. Let me next tell you a little bit more about our modeling approach. Human trafficking is a complex activity in many ways. It involves people who may be acting as individuals or in groups, and some of whom are being exploited and subject to violence and coercion. Much of the activity is underground and hidden. Because of all of this, there isn't a lot of data readily available to formulate quantitative models, and that was an obstacle we had to face. An overarching framework for our research is the representation of sex trafficking operations as graphical networks. You'll see more elaborate renditions later in this presentation, but the graphic on this slide introduces the concept. A trafficker controls 3 victims. We can use different shapes or colors of nodes to represent different types of individuals, as done here with the square representing the trafficker and circles for victims. Nodes can represent other types of entities too, not just people. The arrows, also often called arcs or edges in graph theory, represent relationships between nodes. Again, there can be many types of relationships. Here, an arrow means that the trafficker controls or has influence over the victim. Our interest goes beyond modeling sex trafficking networks. We want to show how models can be used to devise effective strategies for disrupting networks too. The graphical models are useful in this regard. Interdiction activities can be modeled as modifications to the network graph, such as the removal or addition of nodes and arcs. But we also have to take into account how the traffickers, pimps, and others might respond to an interdiction. Could the result of a well-intentioned intervention actually make no difference, or perhaps even make the problem worse? In fact, in some cases it could, as you'll see later. So we have to consider these networks as dynamic networks with feedback effects that can result in unintended consequences. Our project is titled MOST, which stands for Modeling Operations of Sex Trafficking. MOST includes 5 major tasks as listed here. The first was the building of a collaborative team that incorporated multiple disciplines as well as engaged community members. The collection of data and information has also been a major focus. To provide one example, the graphic on this slide is taken from an influential report prepared by Lauren Martin and colleagues in 2017 that mapped the flow of sex trafficking operations and sex buyers in the state of Minnesota. We then developed and analyzed dynamic network models. We spent some time, both within the research team and with our advisory group, for validation of the models and their implications. Finally, an important goal of our project was also to study how we worked effectively or not as a transdisciplinary team. So we have also done a meta study to that end, including analyzing a communications and a qualitative survey. I should say that the project was by no means a linear waterfall effort. Multiple tasks were being done in parallel, and earlier assumptions revisited and models revised as additional information and insight were gained. You'll hear more about the findings of our transdisciplinary meta-study later, but I did want to highlight 4 high-level requirements for effective participation that we came up with. First, deliberate communication, which involves listening, not just talking. In addition to miscommunication, participants from varied backgrounds will have different perspectives, and they may also have different objectives or different prioritizations of objectives. These can lead to difficult but necessary conversations. This leads to the second requirement, trust building. Critical here are ensuring that recognition is shared, that leadership is shared, and that people get to know each other. Building transdisciplinary community-based teams also requires an openness on the part of all participants to enhancing their knowledge and adapting the perspectives they came into the project with. The first step in this process is acknowledging deficiencies in one's own understanding. Being able to adopt an outsider's perspective or training oneself to do so is required. Finally, this all takes time. There is no magic formula where you can throw disparate people together today and solve a societal problem tomorrow. I have emphasized the importance of community partners already, but there is one additional point to make. This goes back to the concept of transdisciplinary community-based research. Doing research with communities is a fundamentally different undertaking than doing research on communities, especially when the communities involved are affected by social injustice and systemic oppression. It is only by making community members equal partners and co-creators of our research that we can avoid pitfalls of traditional disciplinary or even multidisciplinary research, such as objectification and exploitation. Just to reinforce this point, we develop these principles and operating values for our work. We will create models in a responsible manner, not just for convenience of research. We will seek to understand the context of sex trafficking. We acknowledge that our understanding is still limited. And we have to remember that our objective is to disrupt sex trafficking. That is, we have to guard against solutions that simply displace it. So after that extended introduction, let me pass the microphone to Kelly Barrick, who will tell you about the data and information collection methods.
Thank you, Tariq. I'm now going to talk a little bit about our data collection methods. Because there is no single data source that provides a complete picture of sex trafficking operations and networks, we draw from multiple data sources, including comprehensive closed sex trafficking case files from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA, publicly available documents on federally prosecuted cases, stakeholder interviews, and a secondary analysis of interviews previously conducted by Lauren Martin. Incorporating multiple sources is critical because they each contribute a different piece of the puzzle. This allows us to triangulate, verify, and explore the data from various perspectives. Perhaps most importantly, we also engage a survivor-centered advisory group as thought partners and experts throughout our research. As Tariq mentioned, our team includes experts from multiple disciplines as well as community members who in our case are survivors with lived experience. They help verify the findings and fill in gaps that remain even when combining multiple data sources. Next, I'm going to talk a bit more about the case file data, because that was the real challenge of this project. Although law enforcement data had been used in prior sex trafficking research, we had to figure out how to approach it in a way so that it would be useful for operations research models, which is not how it's typically used. Our goal with the case file analysis was to translate dense text about the cases into data to populate the operations research models that can be used to understand interdiction efforts and how to disrupt sex trafficking networks. I'll talk more about this on the next slide, but I want to stress that we're working with very comprehensive case files. This is all of the investigative information and background analytics on the criminal case. Our goal was not to reconstruct the cases in their entirety, but rather to sift through the case information to pull out key network features to guide the modeling. To achieve this goal, we went through numerous iterations to create a code book and a coding process. We started with a very small piece of text that the operations and qualitative research teams worked with. We then showed this to the advisory group early on for their input. We continued to iterate based on review of the federal case files and more in-depth work with the advisory group. As I noted earlier, the case files are incredibly complex, and each one includes more than 1,000 pages of information. We were interested in capturing information about networks, which include relationships, communications, and money, among others, and events, which either structurally change the networks or group participants together. One challenge is that the case files include much more information than this and are not structured so that network information is easily extractable. I should note this is a challenge that's common to most research that relies on administrative data, which by definition is collected to meet the needs of the agency that collects it, not researchers. So for us, the challenge is that the case files include information needed to investigate and eventually prosecute sex trafficking cases. They were not developed specifically to identify network features. So even with all the detail, there are still a lot of the elements of networks that are not well captured in the data. Law enforcement officers gather information to build a strong criminal case. So they're focused on information that will prove that the legal elements of the crime are present. This is what prosecutors need to make a case in court. Law enforcement officers are not trying to reconstruct entire networks, but they will capture network information that's relevant to the criminal case. Despite some of these limitations, the comprehensive case files really do have the most detail. Our other sources, particularly the survivor-centered advisory group, highlight things that are not included in the case files, but that are important for understanding the networks. They guide all of this and let us know when we're missing really important information, and they also help ensure that we're not misrepresenting these networks based on the view from a single perspective. As this graphic shows, we have a process of working together that starts with collecting qualitative data, just text from the case files and transcripts from interviews, coding and transforming that data so that it meets the needs of the models, running the models, and then from those results, producing both static and dynamic visualizations that describe the networks and show the anticipated effects of different types of interventions or disruptions. On the next 2 slides, I'll show a couple examples of these visualizations. First, I want to note that we use the case file analysis to generate initial visualizations, and then the other data challenges, fills in, or corrects these visualizations. This is how we arrive at models that are verified. We engage the real world to build model parameters and assumptions. For this process to be effective, we work together at key points to calibrate our work. For example, the qualitative team had to learn enough about modeling to know what data we needed to collect. The operations research team needed to learn enough about trafficking to understand how networks function and the limits of our project. Right now, we are just finishing what may be considered a pilot phase or proof of concept. We developed our working methods and tried to figure out if we could even do this. Could we take complex and unstructured qualitative data and turn it into the kind of data needed for computational modeling? And the answer to this is yes, we can. And so here's an example output as promised. This shows the relationships between traffickers at the top, their criminal associates, persons trading sex, any items involved, which may include things like cars or drugs, locations involved, and then at the bottom are the individuals who buy sex. Each of the circles is a node, and the lines represent arcs or connections between the nodes. So I mentioned networks are dynamic. We wanted to show you another example, and this is of a relationship network over time. Here is showing how things change over 6 days. As I've mentioned, we were also guided by a survivor-centered advisory group. This is critical because the case files do not tell us the whole story and only include information that's relevant to law enforcement. The advisory group has been engaged throughout the project, and they participate in monthly meetings, provide extensive feedback on our work, and fill in critical gaps. This has even involved some creative sessions that have included things like drawing or constructing diagrams of sex trafficking networks. In operations research, there is a famous saying by George Box: all models are wrong, some are useful. This acknowledges that models cannot capture all the complexities of an application, especially something as complex as sex trafficking. But if models are developed in a responsible and nuanced way, they can be useful in better understanding the system. This is why it was critical to engage survivors in our research. The advisory group provided a consistent reminder that sex trafficking is more complex than models can capture, and by including them, we're able to develop models that account for as many nuances as possible to help understand the system in a new way. So this is just one small example of a network diagram and some thinking from our advisory group. It shows some other connections beyond sex trafficking that are part of the network. So we know about the pimp and the bottom and the victims, but here we're also seeing visualized a booster, just someone who steals things and then sells them. And we also see another pimp or partner. The advisory group also provides rationales and more details. For example, they help us understand why victims may leave networks, which include things like running away, going to jail, choosing up, being rescued, or even dying. And this is crucial information to have when thinking about the consequences of interdictions and disruptions. But the main point here is that for sex trafficking operations, commercial sex is not the only business going on. And it could be that the other businesses are just as important to the operation as sex trafficking. So this diagram is just another more complex example developed by the advisory group. I won't go into detail describing it, but really just wanted you to see how much knowledge the advisory group has about these networks, and that they are absolutely crucial experts to be included in this endeavor. In our current research, we're using the outputs from the advisory group and interviews to generate synthetic yet realistic sex trafficking networks. The advisory group will review these for face validity, and once finalized, we will share the network generator with the larger research community.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to talk about the implementation of our team's transdisciplinary approach in creating a math model that will help to disrupt trafficking networks while accounting for the dynamics of recruitment that occurs within them. Essentially, this analysis will help us show that interventions need to be deployed to both disrupt the ability of a trafficking network to recruit and to disrupt its ability to operate as well. We know something about recruitment and recruiting victims into sex trafficking operations from qualitative research, and more importantly, from our survivor leaders and survivor center advisory group telling us how this happens. Based on qualitative research that Lauren has led over the past 15 years, essentially there's no shortage of people that can be recruited, coerced, manipulated, or forced into a trafficking operation. This particular diagram is from a study that Lauren conducted with Sandy Pierce in 2014 that looked at law enforcement case files from Minneapolis. And essentially what they were able to do was build conceptual models on how recruitment occurred through both the case file analysis and interviews. And essentially when we start thinking about the vulnerability to trafficking, it ends up all being about structural inequalities, and then also the ability of traffickers to exploit the vulnerabilities that arise from this inequalities and inequities. If we think about kind of hardships and trauma and the systemic inequalities, that essentially drives the ability of operations to recruit or obtain victims. And until we start kind of systematically addressing these inequities and inequalities, unfortunately, there's likely going to be a significant supply of people that can be recruited into sex trafficking networks. Now, in terms of kind of the dynamics of how recruitment occurs, there's not a lot of research yet on the monetary cost to the trafficker of recruiting a victim into their trafficking operation. It's going to vary greatly depending on the type of operation and the markets that that operation accesses and can cater to. But preliminary research suggests that for a lot of sex trafficking operations, the monetary cost is really quite low. It could be kind of providing basic needs like food or clothes or a place to live or a place to sleep. Or it could be kind of addressing substance dependency issues, so supplying drugs to people. And then there's also kind of a wide range of wide estimates in terms of how long recruitment takes as well. And this should all kind of factor into how we approach recruitment in the context of math models for trafficking. Now, traffickers often maintain relationships with a lot of people that are not yet in trafficking, including people like homeless youth, et cetera. And essentially to kind of build a social network of people that could end up being recruited into the trafficking operations. And essentially this kind of interpretation or kind of analysis is coming from a lot of the case files that our team has analyzed over the years. And ultimately, kind of what we're we can observe, or what happens is there seems to be a lot of turnover where people leave the trafficking network and also are brought in to the trafficking network as well. So from a modeling perspective, if we're talking about removing people from trafficking, then we need to account for this turnover as well. So in terms of mathematical models, we are going to deal with a type of problem called interdiction. And it's essentially a math model where we have two decision makers that have conflicting objectives. So for example, those that are trying to intervene and disrupt a trafficking network is one class of the decision makers we're accounting for, and then those operating the network is the other. So the traffickers themselves is the other part, other decision maker that we're accounting for. And you can kind of understand how those two decision makers, their objectives kind of conflict with one another. As an intervener, we want to kind of disrupt the network as best as possible, where the trafficker will then operate it in a way that they meet their own kind of objectives. Now, in terms of modeling trafficking networks, we often use these terms nodes and arcs. From a practical perspective, people will often be represented as nodes and the connections between people as arcs. And one kind of critical contribution from the math side, bringing in the fact that we need to account for the dynamics of recruitment, we've made sure to extend network interdiction to account for the fact that the trafficker will recruit people into the network in response to intervention. So essentially kind of capturing the high turnover rate that we've observed as a team from the qualitative side. And then kind of the last piece that we need to kind of talk about is we're going to be discussing a model that has in the network has some level of what we're going to call flow. And this is essentially an abstract concept or abstract way of saying something is moving between the nodes or the people in the network. And in terms of trafficking, sex trafficking in particular, we're going to right now, our mathematical model interprets control as flow. So if this unit of flow is moving from a trafficker to a victim, essentially what that's implying is that victim is being controlled by that trafficker. So this picture is an abstraction of a trafficking network where people are represented through nodes. And we just want to emphasize, we understand that this is an abstraction of the complexities of the lived experiences of victims of sex trafficking. And the abstraction is not meant to ignore or minimize these experiences. We essentially hope that the model will offer insights into effective interventions to disrupt these networks. Now, one thing this picture shows is it only shows kind of the operations of the current network. It does not show kind of the social network that exists with respect to the traffickers that would help them recruit new victims or future victims into the trafficking operation. Now, this slide paints a much kind of clearer picture of the current situation and the dynamics of recruitment that could occur in the future. In this case, the dashed arcs represent potential recruitments that are known to the traffickers. And this also kind of, these dash arcs represent the response of traffickers if victims leave the trafficking network. They essentially will seek to replace them. They'll use their social connections to do so. And now kind of we've looked at this, for example, an intervention could occur. So this is the network pre-intervention, and we could propose an intervention where we're able to remove from the network victims 1 and 6. And the idea would hopefully be to decrease the overall number of victims. But again, that would kind of take a naive approach without accounting for the dynamics of recruitment. Essentially, when we account for the dynamics of recruitment, the traffickers would replace these removed victims. And we end up with a situation where now victims A and B have been brought into the network. And essentially the overall kind of prevalence of trafficking hasn't really changed with this intervention because of the ability to recruit. And this observation, I mean, this is kind of the detail, kind of a detailed explanation of what our math model is suggesting, and kind of a key takeaway of the mathematical model is that interventions should be used to both disrupt the ability of a trafficking network to recruit and to disrupt its ability to operate. Solely focusing on operations doesn't kind of account for the high turnover rate, and essentially, especially for scenarios where there is recruitment can occur with little resources or little time invested on the side of the traffickers. So at this point, I will pass it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Tom. As my colleagues have shared, to tackle our research on modeling trafficking networks, we took a lot of time and effort to actually build our team. Tarek shared what transdisciplinarity means and gave you a great overview of our approach to doing this work. Kelly and Tom illustrated how our team has integrated our conceptualization of trafficking and our methods. Now I'm going to share some of the results from our meta-study of ourselves that we have been conducting over the last several years. The goal of our meta-study was to identify those team practices, processes, and procedures that helped us foster trust and build our team. The meta-study used two sources of data. First, we qualitatively coded minutes from 16 team meetings in order to identify key themes related to trust, communication, and team building. Second, we developed a survey on these same themes that included our whole team. I should note Mahima Gupta, one of our research assistants, took a lead on this portion of the study. So this slide shows the 6 main themes from the meeting minutes that really get at how we fostered integration across perspectives and disciplines. 3 of the themes, clarification requests, challenges, and term and vocabulary discussion, indicate a level of vulnerability to admit when we don't understand and to stick with and chase down misunderstandings. Our team spent a lot of time on these 3 themes. And I want to note that really no one wants to feel stupid, right? So the prevalence of these themes, admitting that we don't know, really required that we trusted each other. Collaboration statements indicated times when team members articulated the need for different perspectives in order to build a fuller or more accurate picture of sex trafficking networks. So this could include conversations about the need to incorporate lived experience and understanding something that wasn't included in law enforcement case files, or other areas where we really honed in on how the different perspectives were going to come together to build a more complete picture. Value statements were an important glue for our team. We articulated and reaffirmed our values as a team a lot in our team meetings. Tarek presented some of our values at the beginning of the presentations. Our values kept us centered and grounded, and it really helped us to tackle and stick with tough and confusing conversations. So, for example, I'm an anthropologist. I'm not really a math person. Our team values really helped to motivate me to dig into the formulas from the OR team, and really push myself outside my comfort zone. Finally, team building indicated just how much time we spent on deliberately getting to know each other. We spent a lot more time on this than is actually reflected in team meeting minutes, because much of our team building took place during activities where we weren't taking notes, like during dinners and lunches and other social activities. On this slide are some findings from the survey about factors we identified as leading to trust. Survey answers included trusting in each other's knowledge and competence, connections through our personalities, being open and finding common ground. Every single team member mentioned integrity and transparency as key, and it really makes sense. You can't really have trust without feeling integrity and transparency from your team members. In their survey responses, the advisory group members also highlighted the importance of being open and non-confrontational. One advisory group member noted that the project was able to create an environment where participants are, quote, not afraid to speak the truth and are in that spot where they can be transparent about their experiences without the fear of repercussion, embarrassment, or shame. This is really important. For members of our advisory group, their knowledge was often gained through pain, violence, and oppression. And they, have experienced a lot of oppression and harm. This is a heavy toll. Christina Melander, who facilitated the most advisory group, and I, really focused on co-creating a healing-centered process as part of the advisory group. This means asking open questions, not assuming answers, refraining from asking about personal experiences, letting the group lead where they wanted to go. We practiced breathing and other self-care during the meetings, and we allowed a lot of space to debrief and support each other as part of the meeting. Not surprisingly, everyone involved in the project identified the importance of cultivating personal connections, showing an interest in each other as people, being curious, and practicing active listening. This all just makes sense. We all want to work in spaces where we feel seen, heard, understood, valued, and cared for. While there was really broad agreement across the whole team on many aspects of the survey, team members with different perspectives did highlight slightly different preferred tactics for answering questions. So, for example, the operations research team valued following up and taking time to answer questions. The qualitative research team felt the same and also added the importance of being non-judgmental. And the advisory group identified the need to respond to questions with respect, to elaborate more fully, and they really appreciated the use of visuals and drawings. I think all of us on the team worried about the balance between developing shared knowledge, team building, and all that, and then also attending to project tasks and deliverables. This was a challenge we just had to work through as a team, and it really helps that team building was one of the explicit goals of the project, so we had dedicated funding and time devoted to this. This is not typical of most research, and luckily for us, we did have that funding, and one of our strong findings is that funding for community-based transdisciplinary work should really have some funds and time to support team building. So this slide summarizes the findings from the meta-study. The first finding might seem obvious, but really getting to know teammates on a personal level is critical. Often in research or other projects, we just jump right into the work. For community-based transdisciplinary teams, building the team is the work. Without trust, we can't be vulnerable enough to truly integrate our perspectives, knowledge, and methods. As I noted earlier, integrity and transparency are critical to trust, and trust is the foundation of team building. Being open, questioning, and spending real time on building shared understanding is essential for integration of perspectives in a community-based transdisciplinary team. Our values and our explicit time devoted to articulating values and talking about values brought us together and motivated us to stick through the tough stuff in this project. Finally, our team building included holding space for potentially triggering secondary and vicarious trauma, and holding space to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that this work is emotionally difficult and it involves really hard stuff. We wanted to acknowledge that we're human, that everyone in this project is human, and that we all need to attend to those things in ourselves as well. So our team processes included check-ins, reflective practices, breathing, and mindfulness activities. So these were just some of our key takeaways from the meta-study of ourselves. And now on to Casey to share some additional team reflections and wrap up our presentation.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, you've already heard some of our colleagues discuss the community-engaged transdisciplinary approach we've taken. Here are a few of our other team members who want to share their learnings about the team building process in their own words.
Hi, my name is Terry Folletti. I'm the Executive Director for Breaking Free. I am a survivor of sexual exploitation, as are most of my staff. I've had the privilege to work alongside some engineers and Dr. Lauren Martin for the last couple years on a project called MOST, where we have been using models and exploring potential disruptions on the network to interrupt and prevent victimization in commercial sexual exploitation. And by me lending my voice to this project, I feel very empowered. And it has been a pleasure working with this team. And thank you so much for this empowerment opportunity. And we look forward to more of this kind of work. Thank you.
Having the survivor advisory group integrated in our team has taught me to be a more intentional and thoughtful researcher. I've learned the power of resiliency, the many ways that researchers can value lived experience, and the importance of including survivor voices at every step of the research project.
Hi, my name is Joy Friedman. I'm a sexual assault domestic violence outreach worker and an independent contractor and a consultant. I work at MIWRC right now, but I am on the MOST advisory group, and in this group, we have come together and used our expertise and our insight and our experiences to build tools that possibly can assist you in helping others not become victims of sexual exploitation. I'm honored and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
The most important thing I have learned about community-based transdisciplinary research is how integral developing trust through transparency, integrity, and shared values truly is. While, of course, knowledge creation is a primary goal to conducting research, we found this would only occur after trust was already developed, since trust was necessary in helping team members to feel comfortable asking and answering questions, and for all of us to feel comfortable sharing our experiences, opinions, and perspectives.
Being part of a transdisciplinary team has made me a better researcher by broadening my perspectives on the problem that we study. This helps us on not only how we can create practically meaningful models, but also how we can communicate these ideas among ourselves and how we disseminate this message to different audiences.
As my colleagues have mentioned, we have sought to build a community-engaged transdisciplinary team that is focused on integrating perspectives across disciplines and developing new frameworks and methodologies to address sex trafficking. Critical to this work is equally valuing multiple forms of knowledge, both academic knowledge and community knowledge. Although building a community-engaged transdisciplinary team takes time and intention, it has enabled us to develop a research agenda motivated specifically by issues raised by the survivor-centered advisory group. Because of this, our team continues to work together on new projects that build upon the research we've discussed today. We currently have 2 additional studies underway. The first builds upon our current work, which sought to understand how sex trafficking networks are structured, to now understand how traffickers react to interventions on those networks. We've learned from our survivor-centered advisory group that traffickers sometimes force victims into other criminal activities, like check boosting, fraud, or selling drugs, to supplement the trafficking operations. So this study focuses on how we can look more broadly at sex trafficking interventions to determine whether the interventions actually disrupt the trafficking network or whether they simply displace the illicit activity to another area. Our second extension to the initial project focuses specifically on disrupting recruitment networks. Here we are trying to better understand the ways in which systems or lack of access to supportive services and basic needs affects people's vulnerability to sex trafficking. Our goal is to be able to provide guidance to resource-constrained communities and organizations that are considering what interventions they should focus on to best prevent sex trafficking recruitment. We hope that we've inspired you to consider building a community-engaged transdisciplinary team, as you also focus on tackling challenging societal problems. Any of our team members would be happy to connect with you if you have any questions or want to discuss this project further. You can reach out to us anytime through the contact information on the screen. And we thank you so much for your interest in learning more.